Own Way, the podcast with me, your host, Kori McClurg. Hey, welcome to another episode of Get Out of Your Own Way, the podcast. So today I want to talk about emotions, feelings, thoughts. You know, we often get in our own way because the whole idea of emotions just trips us up. And I know this for a fact because I was the queen of walling off or denying emotion. So, a little backstory of how I got to be such an awesome compartmentalizer. So, when I was a teenager, young, even teenager, I, clearly got the sense that emotion was just not good, not helpful, and was really just getting in the way of my success in life. And somewhere along about that time, I the show, I'm gonna reveal my nerd heart here. The show Star Trek: The Next Generation came out, and if you don't know the show, there is a character named Data. And Data is an android. He looks basically like a human. He can do everything that a human can do, but like 100 times better. You know, he's got volumes and volumes of information stored in his, memory. He can do analysis and process information, at speed of light, right? Like at the speed that your computer can do it. He can, walk or run faster. He can lift things, 100 times what a human could. I mean, he's superhuman in every way. Except that Data does not have emotion. He doesn't feel. And over the course of the show, the writers made this something that was kind of a fault, almost like Data was always in search of a way to be more human by having emotion. So he was, throughout the course of the several seasons of the show, he was always looking for ways to solve this problem to introduce emotion into his neural network. I thought that was insane. Why? I mean, Data was superhuman. He had removed, or he didn't remove it, but his designers, his creator, had removed what I felt like was our Achilles heel. If we didn't have emotion, we could do anything. I thought emotion was getting in our way. And so this quest of Data to have more emotion, to be more human in that way, I just thought that was insane. So I looked up to Data. He was like, he was kind of my role model, without emotion. I felt like, damn, if I could just be like Data, wouldn't that be awesome? So finally, after, couple 3 decades of me pursuing this mission to be more like Data, I finally got clued into the fact that that is a fool's errand. I finally learned how our brains work, and that emotions are just chemicals in our brain. And in fact, none of us would be here without emotions. Emotions are important, necessary, and just part of being human. We can't carve that part out. How our brains evolved was, of course, all about our survival. Humans that survived passed on their genes over the, many, many, many generations of human evolution. So, millions or even just thousands of years ago, when food was scarce and the environment was dangerous, the genes that survived were those that drove us to instinctually, eat food, especially food that's high in calories, react to present danger, behave in community with others. Of course, we didn't have language at that time for concepts like calories or community, um, but the humans that survived long enough to pass on their genes were the humans that were drawn to these things like high calorie foods, living in communal situations. And in the context of that ever present danger and scarcity, of course, these drives made total sense, right? And, why were these early humans drawn to these circumstances that benefited their survival? Well, it was their brain chemistry. So, for example, we get an influx of dopamine in our brains when we eat. And these early humans, pre-humans, really, they would get that dopamine hit and thus were compelled to find food and eat more. So they had a higher likelihood of surviving long enough to procreate, which meant they were more likely to pass along that dopamine trait. That has happened, right? This passing along of these genes that benefited our survival, that's happened over the course of millions of years. Now, if you think about it, just as we sit here today, consider that dopamine trait as an example. Within our bodies, that dopamine has a feeling to us. An urge, a craving, a desire. These are all indications that you are feeling dopamine in anticipation of a reward, which is another dopamine hit. And the flood of that dopamine feels satisfying or even joyful. Similarly, serotonin, this is another chemical in your brain, more mood focused. It creates kind of a more subtle pleasure to let us know that we're like moving in the right direction and encouraging us to continue behaviors that will ultimately lead to successful mating, finding food, et cetera, et cetera. So again, all just these chemicals in our brain that give us a feeling, and this is the culmination of these millions of years of evolution. So today, in the world where we sit today in the world, where we get tripped up is the fact that our environment looks nothing like the environment of danger and scarcity that humans evolved within. So we still have these chemicals in our brains that cause our emotions, but the applications and the situations in which we experience them are just so drastically different. So the onus is on us to exercise some consciousness around our emotions and thoughts, versus just like letting them drive us as we would have done all these millions of years ago. The point to all this is that these chemical processes in our brains evolved just so long ago, and their development has kept our species alive and propagating for millions of years. And it's these chemical processes that are feelings. So to insist that we're going to deny feelings is just an exercise in futility. Or, even to become overly attached to our feelings or judge ourselves for having a particular feeling or thought, that also just doesn't help our situation. And the sooner we can just accept that we need to work with our feelings instead of, denying, avoiding, walling them off, judging them, or just otherwise responding negatively to our feelings, the sooner we can actually move on to just way more productive stuff. I mean, the bottom line to all this is that feelings are chemical processes that they help us learn in order to facilitate our survival. And some of the behaviors we perform in response to these feelings are maladaptive, unproductive, or even destructive, but that's just simply due to our environment. So, nobody had a drinking problem or a binge eating habit 1,000 years ago, right? Because you couldn't. The environment didn't allow for it. There was a natural limitation to things because of scarcity. Those things just weren't around. So now we're sitting here in this modern environment, and I can have alcohol and food delivered straight to my door with almost no effort, right? So I think if we can just all agree that being more conscious of our emotions and just experimenting more with awareness, when we're more aware, we can just begin to acknowledge our emotions, look at them objectively without judgment, just taking the data, and we can see them for what they are. There's a book I highly recommend on this topic. It's called The Pleasure Trap by Doctors Doug Lisle and Alan Goldhammer. It's really helpful in understanding the development of these emotions, these chemicals in our brains, and how they are up against this modern environment. The pleasure trap refers to this kind of hijacking of this reward system in our brain that was never meant for this environment that we live in today. And you might say, well, why aren't we adapting to our modern environment? Well, our modern environment as it exists has really only been in existence for 100 years. I mean, I guess you could argue 200 years, but that's like nothing. That's a drop in the bucket compared to the millions of years that we've evolved as humans. So it's unlikely. There is no chance that in your lifetime that our brains and our bodies are going to adapt to this environment. So we got to work with it. We got to work with what we got, right? And working with what we've got means that it's just really dumb to ignore our feelings. We just evolved for so long with these feelings as our guide, and we're not gonna be able to dispense with that. There's nothing wrong, right, with you for having emotion. You should have feelings and emotions. Again, it led to the survival of this entire species, right? There's a couple of great videos that also give some more insight into how your brain works and how the modern environment can hijack these chemicals in your brain. They're on YouTube, and I'll put links to them. One's by Centis and one is by Yale Medicine. And one of them talks about addiction, but don't let that freak you out. I don't know why people insist on using the word addiction, because it's not as if there's nothing special about an quote unquote addicted person. We all have these same mechanisms in our brain, and the substances that are involved have addictive qualities. So even though it says addiction, you can replace that word with brain hijacking, and you'll get the idea. Anyway, I think you'll really find that those videos and the book Pleasure Trap super helpful. And I hope you've given this some insight into why you need to just accept that you have emotions and start learning how to be aware of them. Just see them for what they are without judgment. Take some data for yourself around how you're feeling in response to different situations, different stimulus, whether that be food or the situation, and stop beating yourself up over it. It's all right to have feelings.